The current CEO of Network Rail, Andrew Haines, has admitted that if he had the opportunity to rebuild the railway from scratch, level crossings would never be a factor. With over 6,000 crossings around the UK, level crossings remain one of the largest risks on the railway. Level crossings have been around since early Victorian times. In the early days of the railway, it was feared that people would be cut off with railways and tramways running through their fields. It was also feared that the farmers would, in effect, have their lands cut in half by the railways running through them. It's not known who designed the first level crossings, but rather than building bridges or tunnels, crossings using gates were erected. The gates would work pretty much the same way as the hand-power gates of today. The gates would close off the railway so that animals such as cows, horses and sheep would not stray onto the line, and then open by railway staff, called a crossing keeper, when a train was coming. The open gate would close the road, allowing the train to pass safely. But in the early days of the railway, the gates were not universal, so in 1839, in a massive move to regulate safety on the line, an act was passed. This act covered any railroad that converged with a highway. Each railway must make and maintain a set of gates and employ proper persons to attend the opening and closing of them gates. The railways, if they failed to comply within 1 month of when the notice was made law, would find themselves fined £5 per day until the action was remedied to a suitable level. Following this act, level crossing design was universally adopted. If there was a signal box nearby, then instead of a crossing keeper, the signalman could use a capstan wheel to move the gate. And in later signal boxes, the signals were interlinked with the gate, assuring more safety. In 1954, lifting barriers were trialled in place of the gates. Although these initially meant that the amount of disrupted traffic was reduced and they were quicker to lift, it still required a crossing keeper to operate them. But manning the 2,400 rail crossings was proving costly, and British Rail were keen to cut back on the costs. So they sent delegates to visit and study the practice of automated rail crossings with half barriers. These half barriers would be a valued investment and would save the railway in reducing manpower and saving money, with the first barrier being installed in 1961. In 1968, an unusual load was being moved from English Electric to RAF Hickson Airfield. The load, a 120-ton transformer, was being hauled by road using a 148-ton trailer and had a tractor unit at each end, providing power and steering. It wasn't unusual for abnormal loads being transferred between the two sites, as the distance was only 6 miles. Still, precautions were taken and the police escort was organised and the route for the road was mapped. At Hickson, there was a level crossing. It's important to note that there was a warning to drivers that unmanned barriers were coming down 24 seconds before the fastest train passed the crossing. As the escort came to the crossing, the police realised that the route missed the crossing, but the entrance to the airfield was just across it. The tractor slowed and realised the trailer would need to be raised before going over the tracks. The trailer could be raised while the tractors were on the move, but it did slow everything down to only 2 miles an hour. Seeing the road was clear, they set across, citing it would take about a minute for the load to pass safely. As the load straddled the lines, the front driver looked down the line to see the Manchester to Euston 11:30 train bearing down at them at full speed. The driver barely had time to react, knowing the train wouldn't be able to stop in time. He shouted to the rear tractor to push as he pulled as hard as he could. They both pushed and pulled as fast as they could, but it was too late to stop the train hitting them at approximately 75 miles an hour. The train and the first 5 coaches were destroyed by the impact, and 11 people, including the driver and the 2 crewmen of the train, were killed. The train was filled to capacity, and at the inquiry it was found that the Mach II metal design prevented many more deaths. So what happened? On unmanned crossings, it was the train that signalled the barriers to be lowered by the way of a treadle. The treadle worked exactly as expected, signalling to the barrier to come down. The barrier worked exactly as expected and did attempt to lower, right on top of the transformer, with neither drivers in either tractor seeing the warning thanks to the load. Criticism was blamed on all levels. The haulage firm who had taken the load over the crossing, there was a near misses before and had even written to British Railways explaining the problem. The reply they advised they got was curt at best. The police that had escorted the load, they didn't know the presence of the crossing and were unaware of the short notice time, and British Rail and the Ministry of Transport for the lack of foresight and the failure to accommodate for the heavy or long modes at unmanned crossings. Tragically, there was a procedure in place, and a phone was in place at the unmanned crossing, letting the control know that they were taking time to cross. The phone and the sign, letting drivers know that the phone was there, was impossible to read from the road. It was a simple lack of communication from all sides which led to the disaster. British Rail was left reeling from the accident, and the implementation for new unmanned crossings was slowed to a crawl. In 1977, delegates from British Rail once again visited Europe and took notice of the level crossings. These were automatically open and remotely operated crossings. These lowered costs due to the lack of barriers and were installed in 1983. Just 3 years after they were installed, once again, history repeated itself, and once again, a train hit a vehicle laid in their path. The Class 105 DMU twin car hauling a 2-car 114 unit hit the van, tearing it into 5 pieces and killing the passenger as well as 9 people on the train when the train derailed. There have been reports that the warning lights were not operating properly and activating with limited warning time, but it was proven that the lights were working on that day, and the van's driver knew the area and was well aware of the crossing and how it operated. Following this incident, the UK government stepped in, demanding a comprehensive review of all automatically open level crossings, and the review was damning. Shortly after, automatically open and remotely monitored crossings were deemed just too unsafe and began to be modified to be safer, with just one now existing in the UK. Work on automated crossings continued, each type with the intent purpose of making both passengers and the public safer. But in 2004, all of it changed. The 1735 London Paddington to Plymouth was running well. It was an intercity 125 led by a Class 43 power car, and it carried its usual Saturday evening passengers, people day tripping and families ready for that return trip home after shopping in London, most likely getting a head start on those Christmas presents. At 6:10, they passed over a level crossing. A huge bang was heard and the whole train was plunged into darkness and chaos. The 8-car train tumbled and the coaches were concertinaed into each other and strewn across the tracks. Over 60 people were hurt, with 7 losing their lives. The cause was simple. A man had deliberately parked on the level crossing and waited for the inevitable. He made no attempt to move himself or his car, despite the frantic attempt of a police officer who was nearby and called the signaller at the crossing to stop the train. It was just simply too late. The accident sent shockwaves throughout the industry. Accidents created an opportunity to learn and make things safer for the future, but this was completely avoidable, and truthfully it created a sense of fear that other people could do this. So where are we now? In 2019, Network Rail produced a 10-year plan with one simple goal: to eliminate risk at crossings. The long-term goals including closing as many crossings as possible and reduce risk to passengers, public and the workforce, and to increase rail productivity. In the eyes of Network Rail, the only safe crossing is a closed one, but practically closing every crossing on the network may not be feasible. As part of this new approach, every level crossing has been assessed and risk assessed. The communities surrounding the crossing are consulted and an approach is provided. Network Rail understand that a blanket approach is not possible, as every crossing is unique with its own unique requirements. The plan also focuses on 4 key points: technology and innovation, risk management, competence management, and education and reinforcement. If there is no feasible way to close a crossing, then Network Rail will make the crossing as safe as practically possible. Technology will play a massive part in this. By working with suppliers and partners, new innovations will be considered on a whole life basis, while in tandem of keeping the costs low. The new technology will have two goals: to reduce human error and to improve safety. The team will focus primarily on crossings that have a high risk and traffic volumes, such as the main line, footpath and bridleway crossings where line of sight may be inadequate and that are protected with whistle boards, especially those that are known to be used at night time between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. This is known as nighttime quiet period, where the train does not need to sound a whistle on a whistle board, increasing the risk of injury. Footpath and bridleways near to schools and communities. Public operated crossings where the public will ring a phone to the signaller asking to cross. This is a particular risk when the signaller may be a long way away. Public operated phone crossings where the signaller has a high demand or workload. Public worked crossings where the member of the public has to rely on sight and sight alone, determining if it's safe to cross. So what are Network Rail looking to do? The main goal is to make the public aware of the train. This can be done with an audible warning from the crossing and the use of miniature lights. It's hoped that this, coupled with new signage, will give the people the best warning that the train is coming. Improved layouts and barriers will help keep people safe, and a new way of obstacle detection will help drivers and signallers know if the crossing is blocked. As I said before, each individual crossing has come with its own levels of risk. If the risk is too great, then steps are brought in to reduce or cut the risk entirely by closing the crossing in favour of a bridge or a tunnel. Risk assessment isn't a one-time thing. It's under continual assessment to make sure the safety of the crossing and the users. By working with local communities and authorities, Network Rail hope to understand these risks and how it can be reduced. One of the largest risks to the railway is employee competence. In 2015, in my hometown of Knaresborough, a train derailed off the point near to my old home. The fault lay with a mobile operations manager who had rarely worked signal boxes before. Knaresborough has a traditional signal box, which is rather unusual considering it's on the network, but the manager had authorised the train to pass a signal at danger after misinterpreting the signal lever and not check the point's position indicator. Although no one was hurt, it highlighted the lack of training when it came to signalling. The same can be said for crossings. Training and competence are at the forefront of keeping people and workers safe, and evolving that training around new technology is paramount. While it is important to keep the workers trained, it is equally as important to educate the public. It's easy to get mad at a crossing, especially if you're in a rush, but many people fail to realise that trains are mostly silent and their speed can be frighteningly deceptive. Education starts young and usually involves campaigns in schools with information specially designed for younger audiences. For those Thomas fans, there is a book which is free to obtain highlighting the dangers of the railway and crossings in a child-friendly way. For older and more vulnerable people or people who are likely to misuse the crossings, education can take quite a frank turn with campaigns designed to shock and awe. Social media has become a huge game changer, especially in this sort of campaign, as mistreatment caught on camera tends to go viral. The other part is setting the example. If people are caught, there are consequences. Network Rail work closely with the British Transport Police to fine and sometimes imprison those that trespass or misuse crossings. Where misuse is most prevalent, mobile safety vehicles have been deployed with ANPR, automatic number plate recognition, and they have caught many drivers trying to misuse the crossing or race the train. But the police also educate. They run a driver education course showing the risks and the consequences, and many tend not to re-offend once they take the course. I've seen many videos on social media of people misusing the crossings, and each one brings my heart into my throat. Working on the tracks has given me a newfound respect for the railway, and even with my safety and competencies, I would never dream of going onto the tracks without reason, even where I volunteer. It's simply too much of a risk. You might disagree, but personally, I do agree with Andrew's statement. In my opinion, a good crossing is always a closed one.